I still remember the day Marcus passed away as if it were yesterday. The feeling of paralyzing emptiness consumed everything. His smile, his voice, his warmth, all disappeared the moment I found out he wouldn't be coming home again. It was as if the ground beneath my feet no longer supported me. I felt alone, abandoned, and terrified of a future without him. I had always believed we would have a long life together, that one day we'd sit laughing at our grandchildren's antics. But that wasn't to be. At first, I retreated into my own grief, shutting everyone else out. The sorrow over Marcus was overwhelming, and it almost felt wrong to let anyone else get close, as if I'd betray Marcus's memory by seeking support from others. My mother-in-law, Sophie, began playing a more prominent role in my life during Marcus's hospital stay. She had always had a determined and controlling nature, but now, after Marcus's death, it escalated to a level I wasn't prepared for. I was too shocked and heartbroken to notice the signs. I was also grateful that someone was there, someone who could help organize all the practical matters. At the time, it was comforting that Sophie made some decisions for me, decisions I didn't have the strength to make. She arranged the funeral home, decided the date for the memorial service, and handled communication with all our mutual friends and family members. I simply couldn't keep track of everything and let her take charge. I didn't notice how I was slowly handing over my life and responsibilities to her, but it marked the beginning of what would become a struggle between us. After the funeral ceremony, I took a short break from work to gather my thoughts. Sophie began calling me several times a day. She was worried, always asking what I was doing, how I was feeling, and whether I was thinking about Marcus. At first, I interpreted it as concern, but it didn't take long before it felt suffocating. I couldn't do anything without reporting it to her. If I even mentioned going out to buy groceries alone in the evening, she seemed both angry and worried at the same time. She wanted to accompany me or insisted that I call her as soon as I got home. Despite being 33 years old and fully capable of taking care of myself, she managed to make me feel like a child. At the same time, I felt an immense longing for Marcus. I began dreaming at night that he was still here. Sometimes I'd wake up expecting him to be lying next to me, only to be reminded in the next moment that he was gone forever. Sophie believed we were honoring him by sticking to our routines, visiting his grave often, and not changing anything in the house. Of course, I wanted to honor him, but I felt I needed to find a way to keep living too. But every time I tried to move forward, Sophie pulled me back. "Think of Marcus," she would repeat like a mantra every time I talked about the future. A few months later, I decided to return to work. I needed to do something meaningful, something that wasn't just about grief and memories. Besides, I needed financial security. At work, I felt a strange mixture of relief and guilt. Relief because I could finally focus on something other than Marcus's death, but guilt because I was leaving my grief behind during office hours. My colleagues, all aware of my situation, were considerate. It was comforting not to have to explain myself constantly. I could take things at my own pace. It was during a coffee break that I began speaking more personally with Michael, one of my colleagues. He was a quiet and thoughtful person, never the one to take up the most space in meetings or in the break room. We had previously only had a professional relationship, almost exclusively exchanging pleasantries. But that afternoon, he shared with me that he, too, had lost a loved one, his father, in a car accident a few years earlier. He said he recognized my emptiness and uncertainty. We exchanged experiences. Neither of us resorted to cliches like time heals all wounds, but instead spoke honestly about how incredibly hard it can be to handle losing someone you love. It felt as if an invisible bond was formed between us then and there. In the weeks that followed, we continued talking. Not every day, but perhaps once or twice a week. We ate lunch together, and it was nice to avoid the loneliness of sitting at a table for two in the cafeteria. He didn't talk much about himself, but when he did, it was always with a thoughtfulness that I appreciated. He never questioned my grief, offered no cliches or advice. He just listened. And sometimes that's exactly what you need. Someone who just listens. I found myself looking forward to these moments. The first time I realized I was eager to see Michael, I felt almost unfaithful to Marcus. My guilt was so strong, but I wanted to continue our conversations because they gave me peace and reminded me that I was still a human being with my own emotions. not just Marcus's widow. Sophie, meanwhile, continued as before. She called every morning to check if I'd slept well, if I had thought of Marcus, if I needed anything. Then she called in the evening to ask what I had eaten and whether I had grieved enough for the day. It may sound exaggerated, but that's how it felt. She was everywhere, all the time. One evening when I came home from work, she was sitting in my living room waiting for me. She had a key to the house from Marcus's time, one I had never asked back for, as it felt inhumane to take it from her immediately after the funeral. Now I realized I had created a permanent way for her to invade my privacy. I felt stressed. She wanted to talk about funeral costs, how I should handle Marcus's belongings, and how I should honor his memory by keeping everything he had ever touched. When I gently suggested that I might not be able to keep all the hundreds of clothing items and things, she became upset and accused me of being cold-hearted. In the evenings, I wrote in a journal to process everything that was happening. I tried to describe my feelings about Marcus and the world around me, but also to sort out my thoughts about Sophie. At first, I wasn't angry with her. I just thought she was overprotective. I hadn't realized where the line between care and control was drawn. Her emotional need to keep Marcus's presence alive was so strong that she didn't see she was overshadowing me. I started thinking about how I could talk to her about this, but within me, I feared that her grief was so deeply rooted she wouldn't understand, or worse, that she would turn against me entirely. As Michael and I continued to talk, I realized it was becoming harder to limit ourselves to friendly discussions. We talked about our lives, childhood dreams, hopes, and fears for the future. One day after work, when he suggested we grab a coffee at a nearby cafe, I felt a flutter of butterflies in my stomach. It was the first time since Marcus's death that I had felt that kind of nervousness, a glimpse of joy. It surprised me, but I wasn't ashamed. I longed instead to feel like a person capable of joy again, even if only for a short moment. The coffee tasted good, but the company was even better. We talked for almost 2 hours, completely uninterrupted. He told me about his first job, his first breakup, and I shared mine. It wasn't as if we were planning to start a relationship, but there was a mutual attraction between us. When I looked at him, I felt alive for the first time since Marcus passed away. But inside me, conflicting emotions raged. Thoughts of what Sophie would say flitted through my mind. I pushed them aside, knowing I had done nothing wrong. I had simply had coffee with a colleague. A few weeks passed, and Michael invited me to dinner. I hesitated, but accepted. I didn't have the strength to tell Sophie I was meeting someone. I tried to be vague over the phone when she called that evening, and I felt incredibly stressed at the thought that she might show up at my house, as she so often did. I could imagine her interrogating me, and I didn't want to lie to her either. Not because she deserved full insight into my life, but because I didn't want to create more drama. If she found out everything later, she would accuse me of going behind her back, even though she really had no say in the matter. When I came home after dinner, there were already 3 missed calls and a voicemail from Sophie. Her voice sounded worried, asking where I was, why I wasn't answering, and whether I had forgotten that I was a widow with a duty to honor Marcus. It was the first time I heard her express that I wasn't allowed to go out and enjoy myself like any single woman. I felt a lump in my stomach. Anger mingled with shame, a shame I shouldn't even feel. I deleted the messages, but couldn't sleep. A few weeks later, it became impossible to hide the fact that I was seeing Michael. I didn't want to live a double life, and I realized I had no obligation to hide. Sophie found out by chance. She happened to see a photo of us together on social media. A mutual colleague had taken a picture of me and Michael in the lunchroom and posted it. It wasn't a revealing photo. We were simply standing next to each other, smiling. But for Sophie, it was catastrophic. She called me multiple times in a row before I could answer, and when I finally did, she was furious. She said, "How dare you desecrate Marcus's memory like this?" I went cold. It was impossible to have a rational conversation with her. She had already decided I was a disgrace, running around chasing new men. She hung up with the words, "You're betraying Marcus." The next day, I came home from work to find my mailbox full of envelopes I didn't recognize. Sophie had been there, leaving behind bills, insurance documents, and other papers related to Marcus, documents she believed I needed to sort through to organize his estate. I immediately noticed there was no logical reason to suddenly hand over these documents in such a way. It was merely a statement. She wanted to show me that I couldn't escape my responsibilities, that I had no right to move on, and that I should remain the widow under her supervision. Tears welled up as I picked up the heavy stack of papers. I felt scared and confused, but most of all, I felt a growing frustration. How could she think I had to stay alone for the rest of my life? I talked to Michael about this. He suggested I set clear boundaries and tell her that her behavior was unacceptable. It sounded simple in theory, but in practice, I felt immense guilt. Sophie was Marcus's mother, and I didn't want to hurt her more than she was already hurting over her son's death. But at the same time, I understood I had to protect myself and my own life. When I mustered the courage to call her and bring it up, she responded with a cold tone. "I don't understand what you mean. I'm just worried about you and want to help." When I asked her to stop coming to my house unannounced, she said she had every right in the world to ensure that the house she had once helped me and Marcus with was in order. She reminded me that they had lent us money for the down payment, as if that gave her unlimited access. The conversation ended in a heated argument, with her accusing me of being ungrateful. Meanwhile, my relationship with Michael grew. We didn't do much in public, mostly because I felt nervous about Sophie's reactions. But we had lunch together every day, exchanged long messages some evenings, and occasionally went to the movies. These were small steps, but they felt like major milestones for me internally. I dared more and more to let myself feel joy, even though memories of Marcus always lingered as a quiet sorrow. Michael was full of understanding and didn't pressure me. He knew I had a complicated relationship with Sophie and tried to support me without interfering too much. But Sophie soon found new ways to make her presence felt. One evening, I came home and tried to log into my online banking account. The password suddenly didn't work. When I called the bank, it turned out that someone had reported my card as stolen. Both the card and my online banking credentials had been blocked. I was shocked. I immediately suspected Sophie, as the only other person who knew my banking details was Marcus, and he was gone. I had to schedule a meeting with the bank to prove I wasn't a victim of real theft, but likely sabotage. It felt surreal to think Sophie could go this far, but at the same time, it was the only explanation. I didn't know how to prove it or even if I dared to accuse her openly. A few days later, my boss called me into his office. He looked concerned. Apparently, someone had called him, claiming I wasn't doing well, that I was an alcoholic and a danger to the work environment. I couldn't believe my ears. My boss said he took it with a grain of salt and wanted to check with me personally before proceeding. I was both grateful and shaken. I realized it was yet another move by Sophie. No one else in my life would think to call my boss and spread such grotesque lies. Michael was furious when I told him about it. He wanted to confront Sophie directly, but I stopped him. I feared that if he got involved, she would hate me even more. It didn't stop there. One Friday evening, Michael's sister called me unexpectedly. I had never spoken to her before, so the call came as a surprise. She explained that Sophie had somehow tracked down her number and called to warn her about me. Sophie told her I was a manipulative woman trying to use Michael to replace Marcus, and she insinuated that I had a history of infidelity. Michael's sister was wise enough not to believe what she heard, but she called me to ask what was going on. I explained the situation, crying, and she listened patiently. It was humiliating to realize how far Sophie was willing to go to destroy my and Michael's relationship. I started sleeping poorly. Nightmares about Marcus's death blended with dreams where Sophie chased me, accusing me of various wrongdoings. I woke up in panic several nights in a row, feeling my heart pounding and cold sweat on my forehead. I often considered moving, changing jobs, or even leaving the city, but I didn't have the strength to change everything at once. Besides, there were still things in the house that reminded me of Marcus, memories I wasn't ready to leave behind. I wanted to learn to live with my grief, not run from it. But Sophie's constant presence made the process unbearable. A turning point came when Sophie showed up unannounced again. She brought a large paper bag, claiming it contained things she had found in her own storage. Things that belonged to Marcus. Photos, old letters, some of his school books. I went through them with a lump in my throat. Then I noticed that some of the documents were extremely personal, even things Marcus had never shared with me during his lifetime. It felt like an intrusion into his privacy and mine. When I tried to explain this to Sophie, she accused me of being ungrateful. She called me heartless for not crying over the documents or thanking her for keeping them safe for my sake. It ended with her snatching the papers from my hands and storming out of the house. I heard the door slam behind her, and I sat there, shaking, with a growing sense of violation. After that incident, I felt I had reached my limit. I gathered the courage to tell Michael that I couldn't continue living with Sophie controlling every aspect of my life. He fully supported me and said he would stand by me no matter what I decided to do. We agreed that it was no longer enough to set boundaries over the phone or in personal conversations. She always broke them. I decided to meet her one last time and give her an ultimatum. Either she accepted my life choices and my relationship with Michael, or we would have to cut ties entirely. I remember my heart pounding as I called her to suggest a meeting. She was cold but agreed. We met in a neutral location near my workplace. I had written down some points on a piece of paper to keep myself on track. I told her that I respected her grief, that I had loved Marcus more than anything, but that I also had the right to keep living. I told her she had no right to sabotage my relationship with Michael, to call my boss, my bank, my friends, or Michael's relatives to spread lies. I also said that if she didn't stop, I would have to file a police report. She smirked when I said that. She claimed I was paranoid and imagining things. She swore she had never called my boss or blocked my card. I pointed out that the evidence spoke for itself. She interrupted me, saying, "You're so blinded by your selfishness, Anna. You didn't even grieve Marcus properly. You've destroyed my son's memory, and you deserve everything that's happening to you." I was nearly shaking with anger, but tried to remain calm. I replied, "It's exactly this kind of behavior that makes my decision clear. I won't tolerate it any longer, Sophie. I'm telling you now, if you don't change, I'll have to cut you out of my life completely." She snapped back, "Do you think you can survive without me? I've always been the one helping you. If you keep this up, I'll make sure people know who you really are." I had no idea what she meant by that. I wasn't afraid of slander. She had already done everything she could to sabotage me. Maybe she was playing one last desperate card, hoping I'd back down. But I was determined. I ended the meeting and walked away. Her gaze was filled with hatred, a look I had never seen from her before. I tried to prepare myself emotionally for what was to come, and sure enough, she escalated her attempts. Suddenly, friends began calling me, asking why Sophie was sending out long, bitter messages about how I was a cheating slut who had betrayed Marcus as soon as he died. Strange posts began appearing on social media, posted from an anonymous account, but the text bore a striking resemblance to Sophie's previous outbursts. I tried to have them removed, but the damage was already done. Some of my less close acquaintances reached out, asking what was really going on, and I had to explain over and over again. I felt my last ounce of energy being drained. I could no longer take it. I called Sophie again, now crying out of anger and desperation. I begged her to stop. I asked what she wanted to achieve. Did she want me to lose my job, my reputation, my friends? She coldly replied, "You're nothing without Marcus. You should thank me for even caring about your miserable life." That was the final straw. I told her that if she didn't stop immediately, I would file a police report for harassment and defamation. She laughed into the phone and called me pathetic before hanging up. The hours that followed, I sat with my phone in hand, wavering. I was terrified of truly moving forward with a police report against my own mother-in-law. It felt like an incredibly drastic step, but I was tired of being treated like a puppet. I realized she would never stop unless I took decisive action. Finally, I called the police and explained the situation. I detailed how I suspected she had blocked my cards, contacted my employer to spread lies, reached out to my boyfriend's family to slander me, and posted defamatory statements on social media. They were understanding and assured me that I had sufficient grounds for a harassment complaint, potentially even for defamation and stalking. I scheduled a time to come in and give a formal statement. After filing the report, I felt a strange mix of relief and shame. I cried in the car on my way home. It felt as though I had betrayed Marcus's memory by distancing myself from his mother, but another part of me knew this was necessary for my own survival. I went straight to Michael and told him everything. He held me in his arms, and I felt for the first time in a long while that I didn't have to carry this burden alone. In that moment, I realized I wasn't just doing this for myself. I was also honoring Marcus in a healthy way by not allowing his mother to completely ruin our lives. The following period was filled with investigations and paperwork. The police took my story seriously. I submitted screenshots of Sophie's social media posts, voicemail recordings, and dates and times of calls to my boss. I felt almost numb from all the steps in the process, but also resolute. During this time, I blocked Sophie's number. She tried to reach me with messages, but I gave her no response. I didn't know how she reacted to the report, but I could imagine she was furious. Meanwhile, my relationship with Michael deepened. We talked a lot about the future and about how we wouldn't let Sophie or anyone else dictate our lives. At the same time, I couldn't stop thinking about Marcus. How would he have reacted if he had seen all of this happening? I used to whisper to him when I was alone, "I'm sorry, but I can't take it anymore. I need to have a future." I hoped that, wherever he was, he understood me and didn't judge me for choosing to move forward. The grief over Marcus didn't disappear, but it changed shape. It became a part of me, but it no longer consumed every light in my life. One day, I received a letter from Sophie's lawyer. It stated that she was considering legal action against me for defamation and false accusations, and that she believed she had the right to demand repayment of the money she and her husband had once lent Marcus and me for the down payment on our house. I immediately handed the letter to my own lawyer, who reassured me that she had no legal grounds for such claims. It was mostly a scare tactic. Still, I felt the fear settle in my chest. Would it ever end? Would I have to live the rest of my life at war with my late husband's mother? During this time, I asked myself many existential questions. How does one honor a beloved spouse who has passed away? Is it right or wrong to start a new relationship a few months later? How much should one let others' opinions dictate their actions? I came to realize that no one can truly dictate what is right in the landscape of grief. Everyone's path is different. Sophie had her way, which for her meant never letting go of Marcus. My way became trying to build a new life where Marcus would always remain in my heart, but where I could also make room for new relationships. Sophie didn't completely stop, but her attempts to contact me became fewer. The police had been in touch with her, likely giving her a clear warning that if she continued, she risked prosecution. Still, I heard rumors that she was spreading stories about me to mutual acquaintances. I couldn't stop everything she did, but I started learning not to let it destroy every waking moment. I gave myself permission to live, to laugh, to feel joy, even though I had lost Marcus. When I look back on how it all began, with Sophie as a worried mother-in-law who wanted to help, I can hardly understand how it escalated so far. Perhaps it was a combination of her grief, her personality, and my own need for support at the beginning. I had given her more power than I should have. By the time I opened my eyes, she had already taken control of more of my life than I realized. Perhaps this is a lesson for others in mourning, not to completely lose yourself even when you need help. Today, I'm still in a relationship with Michael. It's not always easy. I carry a lot of grief within me, and he struggles with his own losses. But we're trying to build a future together. I haven't completely closed the door on Sophie. A part of me hopes she might one day come to understand that she wasn't honoring her son's memory by destroying my life. But until that day comes, I've blocked her on all channels, and I have a contact within the police I can reach out to if she escalates again. Sometimes I remind myself of Marcus's smile, his kindness, and his view of the world. He was a warm person who would have hated to see me suffer like this. That gives me strength to understand that I'm not wrong for moving forward. Moving on doesn't mean forgetting. It's about allowing myself to carry his love forward and share it with others. Perhaps that's the best way to honor him, not by being stuck in bitterness and self-loathing. I'm not the same person I was before. Grief has changed me, and the struggle with Sophie has made me tougher, but also more determined. I believe in love again, but I also believe in boundaries. No one should be allowed to ruin your life, whether they're a family member, a parent, or even a widow's mother-in-law. I don't regret filing the police report. It was necessary to draw the line, even though I wish the situation had never escalated so far. If someone asks me today who I am, I might answer, I'm Anna, widow of Marcus and girlfriend of Michael, but I'm also myself. It took me a long time to get here, to understand that I'm more than just a role in relation to someone else. Sophie wanted to keep me locked in the role of Marcus's widow, and nothing more, but I chose to release those shackles and allow myself to breathe, laugh, and love again. After all, that's what life is about.
If you liked this story, please subscribe and give us a thumbs up. It helps a lot, and you won't miss out on any future stories. Take care and live your best life.